Earlier this morning, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait signed a pact on the so-called neutral zone. This strip of land between the two countries has oil fields that can produce as much as 500,000 barrels a day. Bloomberg's executive editor for energy and commodities joins us now, Stuart Wallace, here on set in London. Stuart, good morning once again. So the significance of the neutral zone, they can produce that much, 500,000 barrels per day, but this doesn't necessarily mean they will. Is that right?
Right. And so we're thinking about net additions. So several ways of thinking about neutral zone. Number one, brings on a lot of spare capacity, which they clearly need after all those attacks on the infrastructure. Number two, and this is when you get really geeky, it produces the kind of oil that we're missing from places like Iran and Venezuela because of the sanctions. So it's the very heavy oil that certain refineries need to keep operating. And then number three, I think it's a general sense that we're here to control the market. We now have this additional capacity to allow us to do that. That means if we get attacked or there's, further problems with Iran, then we should be able to provide the market with what it needs. Because
the Saudis and OPEC Plus in general have been trying to convince the markets that they will cut back on production further if it's required, if the demand story would dictate that move would make sense. But does the market have faith in OPEC Plus and the members of it to do that?
No, it has faith, I think, in Saudi Arabia because it has clearly shown over the last 6 months.
Targets.
Well, and goes way beyond that. In fact, starts compensating for all the members of that group that are really doing very little or actually raising production. So yes, faith in Saudi Arabia, and then I'd say diminishing amounts of faith as you go further along the grouping. But beyond that, in terms of the goal for next year, I think it's about saying we'll take barrels off if we need to, but it's about being the reliable supplier. So a lot of the attacks that we saw in Saudi Arabia this year have been about challenging that position, that whatever the circumstances, will get your oil to you. So they did that in, 2 Gulf Wars and many other, the invasion of Kuwait and so on. It's about being reliable.
And because of the amount of oil that they have on the sidelines in storage, are they able to be released into the reserves they have released, that they can release into the market if it's needed? That was how they rode out that particular storm, was it?
Yeah, exactly. So they'd spent decades building up these stockpiles around the world, so in places like Japan and so on. And initially, everyone assumed, well, it's about building ties with the refining industry in these countries. Again, reliability of supply, you can always trust us. And then I think as those attacks happened this year, it became increasingly evident that those were the main mechanism by which Saudi Arabia would keep a lid on prices, very successfully, as it turned out.
Yeah, because it seemed as, in the aftermath of that attack, it seemed as if the market would be severely disrupted, and we saw the price spike, but the price spike lasted no time.
Yeah, exactly. It was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, again, been doing this for a while, I have never seen the market come back from an attack of that magnitude so quickly. So that is a credit to the Saudis that they managed to do that. On the other hand, you can say they were so efficient about doing it that they actually lost several months of significantly higher oil prices.
Yeah, which maybe didn't play to their favour. What kind of price do the Saudis want right now? Of course, the Aramco IPO, smaller than expected, more domestic than expected, lower free float than expected, perhaps, ahead of time, but still it happened. And how is that changing the Saudis' thinking about what kind of oil price they want?
So for this, we think the Saudi oil price probably somewhere between 60 and 70 at the moment, and again, that's about keeping things steady. You're not going to destroy demand. On the other hand, you're not going to encourage additional supply from elsewhere. But in terms of the Aramco IPO, it's really thinking now about stability. Again, it's back to that being a reliable supplier, but it's also about being in a position where they can fund all these dividends that they've promised without having to go into the debt market to do that.